much, I don't know, but I don't know if we can talk about it too much. What we're talking about this morning is process addictions, and process addictions, uh, it's uh, it's the behavior that we get addicted to. And if you have the brain of an addict, what a process addiction is, the activity will fire that pleasure part of the brain, and what it says is, I want more of it. I want more. I want more. A lot of your drug addicts and alcoholics will switch addictions in recovery. Some of them will switch over to a process addiction, or maybe they're having a process addiction at the time that they're, using. Particularly your gambling addicts will, many of your alcoholics will also be gambling addicts. And so that goes hand in hand. But there's people who have never had a drink in their lives or a drug that can have a process addiction. And sometimes it can do as much harm as a process addiction. And what it's, hello? Did you ask something?
Sorry.
Okay, so I want to go through what a process addiction is, and I want to start and I want to finish with the importance. The importance. If you think you might have a process addiction, there are a lot of good therapists out there, but unless they are trained in the field of addiction, they will diagnose you with a mental health diagnosis, which you may have. But they won't know to recognize, they won't ask the right questions to see if you have a process addiction. So, what I'm saying, if there's any form or you suspect any form of addiction for yourself or your family, ask, when you look for a therapist or a counselor, ask the right questions of what their training is. And I am not faulting master level therapists or PhDs or any of that. If what I'm saying, many of them will not have the education for addiction. So they may talk with you, but anyway, I'm wearing that out. But I want to start with that and finish with that, the importance of finding the right help for yourself or for a loved one, because it's a process addiction. It's like substance abuse. Can be. It's addictive behavior. It can become chronic, and can become fatal left untreated. So I'm going to go through the different forms of process addictions, and there are many. But what I want to talk about first is how are you affected by them, and how do you identify them, and how it's left untreated is what it affects. It will affect every relationship a person has if they have a process addiction. It will also affect the family's life. It'll affect finances. It can lead to legal problems. It can lead to problems in the workplace, to school, to your mental health. Now, this is when it turns to affect your mental health, and a family member or someone will get you to a therapist, a mental health therapist. And unless they're trained to ask the right questions, they will not know that what the primary is a process addiction or addiction. And so it affects mental health, it can affect physical health, and it's they're affected much the same way as substance addiction, substance abuse disorder. You know, everything changes. We used to say alcoholic and drug addiction. Now it's substance abuse disorder, and I forget to say that sometimes. But anyway, all right, so let's go into, and like I said, many times alcoholics, drug addicts, people who suffer from substance abuse disorder in recovery will switch addictions. Because what they're doing is searching for something to change the way they feel. And substance abuse disorders will change the way you feel. So let's kind of go through, and there are many, but there's some primary ones. In today's time, internet addiction. Internet addiction is a big thing. And it's affecting children, particularly teenagers, young adults. It's that internet addiction. And coupled with that internet addiction can be compulsive spending. You can also find compulsive gambling on the internet. You can also find problems, any form of sexual activity that you want on the internet. I mean, it's all there, but the main thing about today is about internet addiction is the gaming. And we think of the gaming for young teens, teenagers, young adults. It's not just them. Older people get into it too. And what the gaming does, what it substitutes, is relationships. Usually you're gamers, people that are really into spending hours gaming, playing those different types of game. They're usually very lonely. They usually isolate. They have very few relationships. A lot of times they are depressed. A lot of times you will find your people with anxiety will get on the gaming, and they think it's going to help their anxiety. It creates more. So gaming is a big deal. Internet addiction is a big deal. When I went into the field, we didn't even have computers. Do y'all know that? I had a client, an alcoholic client, years ago, 40 years ago, and he was a brain. He was very, very smart. He was also a drug addict, and I was in the office one day, and there was glass all around it, and he came and was looking over into what I was doing. Well, I was doing paperwork, and he came to the door, and he said, one of these days, that'll be obsolete. And I said, what? You sitting there writing on a pad with a pen? That'll be obsolete. And that phone where you call other treatment centers, that'll be obsolete. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, everything will be computerized. You'll be able to get on a computer and contact any treatment center in the world to find out if who you're treating has been to another treatment. Anyway, he went on and on and on and on, and I said, I think you've been smoking way too many of those funny cigarettes. I put him down. I mean, I did not think he knew what he's talking about. It sounded like science fiction to me. Well, folks, he was very correct. And, that's what everything is computerized today. And so internet addiction is a big thing. And, I do not want to leave women out of this. It sounds like I'm speaking just to men. But, how large is Amazon, the company Amazon? Oh, it is huge, and you never have to leave your home to shop. And you get those little boxes, and it's like, if you're my age, you can order something on the internet. You can order something through Amazon. And it's like Christmas. When you get it, you've forgotten what you've ordered, and it's a surprise. Oh, look what I've got. So it's a big deal. I'm laughing, but it is a big deal, the internet. And so, and that goes into spending addiction. Spending addiction is indebting, credit card debting, and spending addiction. It really, it can fill up what any addiction does. There is a core pain on the inside. It's like, what I call the hole in the soul. It starts with that. It starts with feeling lonely. It starts with feeling not good enough. It starts with feeling that somebody wants some excitement and they don't know where to get it. And so it's any process, or I believe any addiction starts with feelings of being lonely or left out or not good enough. And so your spending addiction can lead to, and credit card, any one of them, any addiction can lead to death and homicide or suicide. And the deal about that, we can joke about it, but it's not a joking matter, because, when people have, get into overspending, there's a high rate of suicide with overspenders. And what it is, any process addiction, or any addiction, since we're talking about process addictions, what it is, it's a way to escape reality. Not to live in the here and now. And so recovery is, we've got to look at the here and now. We've got to look at our lives. What is so empty about our lives? What is so, that feeling of emptiness on the inside, that hole in the soul, that we need to fill it up with something, bring it from the outside in. I can just talk about internet addiction, and it covers so many of these. But anyway, I'm going to go on to gambling addiction. Now, gambling addiction is really the only addiction that appears in the DSM, and that's the diagnostic tool for diagnosing mental health issues. Gambling addiction is the only one listed. Now, they have listed people who, they have listed binge eating disorder as an addiction. And they say eating disorders are process addictions. I think that I'm getting ahead of myself, but anyway, I'll talk about eating disorders in a minute. But I want to go back to gambling. Gambling is the grandfather of all process addictions. And anything that we do as far as an addiction, we're gambling with our life. But gambling addiction is a biggie. And what gamblers are really into rituals. They have rituals. And another thing what gamblers do is they're always chasing the wind. W-I-N, not W-I-N-D, the wind, always chasing the wind. This time I'm going to win big. And big is not good enough. They want bigger, they want more. And they're professional gamblers who spend their entire life perfecting the gaming. And so, but I want to talk about the rituals. I'm going to give you an example of a ritual. When, I've been around a while, and so when those little, you go to the grocery store and
the little scratch off?
And buy a scratch off. I couldn't remember. You would go to the grocery store and buy those scratch offs, and you could win from $2 to 10,000 or 15 or million, hundreds, and So, but it started many, many years ago. And there was this small town, this grocery store got them, and they started selling scratch-offs. And so this man one day had a little girl about 7 or 8 years old. And by the way, I didn't know this story personally. I had learned this when I was becoming a gambling, not a gambler, but a gambling counselor. And so and this was an example that they gave us. In fact, gambling addiction was the very first process ever addressed in the addiction field. And so this was many, many years ago when I became a gambling counselor. But they gave us this illustration. This man went in to the to this little, small grocery store, had his little girl with him, 7 or 8 years old. There were several people there, and they were kind of fascinated by this new, deal behind these scratch-offs. So the little girl was standing there, and so he bought a scratch-off, and before he scratched it off, he rubbed the top of her head and kind of patted it, and he said, "You're my good luck piece. Say good luck to your daddy." And so she said, "Good luck." And he won $10,000. And there were neighbors there. He scratched it off, screamed and hollered, jumped up and down. And there were people there, and it was a small town. The word got out about him winning $10,000. So people wanted him to bring his little girl in when they were going to buy a scratch off. And what happened, through not very long, the top of her head became bald. Can y'all imagine that? From them doing this to her head, patting her on the head and doing this to her hair as a good luck charm. And that's a sad deal. But they started a ritual and they couldn't stop it. Now, did that little girl, have any kind of special, feelings or anything that created that she was a good luck charm? No, she didn't. Her father started it. He won $10,000, and it became a ritual in that community. And and they were turned in to Child Protective Services, by the way. So that is kind of extreme, but most of your gamblers do have a ritual. They have a ritual of, if they are Vegas gamblers, they have a ritual of what's airline they fly on, what time of day they want to fly, when they want to arrive. Now, if they get to be kind of big time, and they don't even have to be big time gamblers, they just have to throw a lot of money to a casino, and they become somebody in a casino. They will get everything paid for just so they will come there and gamble. And so that elevates the feeling of a gambler into being somebody. Because they are sought after, and then other motels or hotels will send them these package deals. But they'll have a ritual about what they wear, maybe a certain pair of socks or a certain tie, or everything becomes a ritual. And I had my husband's permission to talk about his gambling. He's been gone 11 years. And when we can talk about gambling, we can kind of laugh about what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We can talk about it kind of light, and there's nothing light about a gambling addiction or a true gambler. And there's different forms of gamblers. And like I said, I have my husband's permission to talk. He said if it would help one person, you can talk about my gambling, or in the past he'd let me talk about his alcoholism. But I was owned a treatment center, still do, and I was a gambling counselor, which, by the way, I did give that up. I gave it up. The family usually can be the first or the last to know about any addiction. With gambling, a lot of times the family is the last to know. And like I said, there's different forms of gambling. And what my husband got into was business gambling. Do you know it's not against the law to give your money to someone and they can say that they are investing it for you? And, they're chasing the wind. You give me, another $1,000. We need just one more thousand, more, one more 5,000, more of this, and we're going to hit it big. What he was gambling on, supposedly, was the bullet train in Europe. Well, it didn't exist. I mean, the train existed, but the deal didn't. And the person that got him into it seemed so legitimate. She had been a vice president of one of our local banks. And wouldn't a financial person like that really know?
Now the hospital surgery, sir.
Sally.
Wouldn't they really know about, I lost my train of thought. Anyway,
I did too.
Wouldn't they, well, I've lost completely. All right, where was I? Do y'all know? Anyway, you would think someone that worked in a bank was legitimate,
Yeah.
and that they were sincere, and that they were legal, and they were legit. Well, this woman was a con artist. And did you know it's not against the law to give your money to a con artist? It's not. It's not against the law, and you cannot recoup any of it. I think he recouped 80, maybe 80, I don't know, probably 8,000 was all he recouped of it. And what he gambled up was he had sold his business to our son, and he gambled up all of his retirement. Now that is sad, folks. That was my beloved husband. I didn't even know that he was doing it. I didn't know. This is the sneaky part of gambling. It can be very secretive. And how we found out is my daughter was our accountant, and she was driving her dad's pickup one day and looked in the little deal there for the glove compartment thing, and found out where he would always pay the taxes and certain things. And she, anyway, found out that he hadn't paid her taxes. And, that was on a Saturday. We confronted him about it, and, excuse my language, but I had his little skinny ass in treatment in the Meadows by Tuesday, because I knew enough about gambling addiction that he wouldn't stop without treatment, and that he wouldn't stop without serious treatment. And he was 68 years old. That seemed really old then. It's looking younger every day. But he went for 28 days, and there was family week, and he knew that I was coming out to get a divorce, and I thought about it. And then, I'm pretty faithful. I did not divorce the man. And, I'm in the addiction field. I knew it was a disease. It was not, it was another addiction. But, at his age, we thought he would spend 28 days and they would send him home. And guess what? They didn't. They sent him to a halfway house in South Carolina for white-collar gambling. And he was there with some big-time gamblers because it's like business gambling. That's white-collar gambling. And this was a self-made man. My husband started working at age 13, didn't have anything, worked himself up. Anyway, he was a hard-working man. And it still saddens me that he had that addiction to gambling, because I think that shattered him more. And he was 16 years sober when he went to, because he was 52 when he sobered up. He was 16 years sober when he went to treatment for gambling addiction. And he came back shattered. It shattered his self-esteem. It shattered his, feeling about his family. He had so much shame and regret and all. And so I'm going to get off gambling addiction in just a minute. But it's one of the, I mean, it is the only one really in the diagnostic tool of addictions, of diagnosis. And so, but it all starts small. You know, his started, he loved to go to Vegas. I just thought we went to Vegas because it was fun. And I never gambled. I might do $20, and then I was a tightwad. I'd rather take my $20 and go shopping and treat, and do my addiction, with shopping. But anyway, he was kind enough to let me share that story. He came back. He was a faithful member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and what he did, there was no GA meetings here, Gamblers Anonymous, and he started Gamblers Anonymous. And he was able to help a lot of people, but it is a very shameful disease. I think in some ways it's more shameful than that people have more shame around it, even with drugs and alcoholism. Okay, so I'm off of the gambling, but then another one is sex addiction and relationship addiction. We call it love and sex addiction. And sex addiction is, there's no easy one of any of these addictions. But what sex addiction is, it stems from the deep, deep feelings of loneliness. And that sex addiction usually starts with that feeling of not connecting to one or the other parent. And what, the feeling is loneliness. And what, people have that get into sex addiction, what they get out of it. And, we're not none of us that are addicts are a bunch of idiots. If we didn't get something out of it, we would quit doing it. But what a sex addict gets out of the sex act is the release of stress, the release of pain, and it's really a lot about the chase for the love addict. The love addict gets addicted to chasing into the chase. And they do that dance, that love addiction dance, and they usually, a love addict will go after someone that is not available, and sometimes that person that's not available will be some form of an addict, alcoholic, drug addict, or a sex addict, or they can be a work addict, or they can be married, or they can, what they get addicted to. The love addict gets addicted to the back walking away. They get addicted to the chase. When they're chasing someone and the person turns around and engages with them, and, if it's a sex addict will have sex with the love addict. Now, there's no commitment there most of the time, but they will accommodate the love addict, and they'll get into that sick sexual relationship. Or, if it's any form of addiction will do, because eventually that addict is going to go back to their primary romance, and that's their addiction. And so the love addict is like the gambler. They chase the wind. They chase trying to get that addict to turn around and love them. All addictions, and every addiction starts in childhood. And love addiction starts in childhood, and sex addiction starts in childhood. And a lot of times what your sex addict will do, and I use a man as an illustration, it can very much be a woman, but a lot of times your sex addicts will live in some form of dysfunctional home. I give the example of living where there's violence, domestic violence, and a little boy will lay in bed and hear that domestic violence, that mom and dad fighting, and the dad hitting the mother, and the little boy tried to come in between them, and then they'll both turn on the kid and make him go back to bed. But that turmoil lives in that child's head. And when he's a little boy, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age, he will find himself and he can start masturbating at a very young age, and he gets the release from the sex act, and he feels good, and he can go back to sleep. So that's usually your sex addicts start the sex addiction with a feel good of the release, and it can start, like I said, very young, and so it can start in childhood. And then with your love addict, many times you go back to a love addict's childhood, and primarily the father. It could be the mother, but primarily there's a lot of neglect in there. And neglect can be the form in having a work addict parent. It can be in the form of having any addiction will do that will create children feeling abandoned. And so let's say this little girl had a father that was alcoholic, and he wasn't even present when he was at home, but because of that drug alcohol came right between her and her father. And so it was like he would turn around and leave the house to go drink, and so that sets up that longing in a little girl of trying to go after her father. And it can be a little boy too, I'm just saying little girl, but it sets up that yearning to try to get that father to turn around. And that's what we call father hunger. This happens a lot with eating disorder people too. But what it sets up is that love addiction, trying to seek love. And so in her adult life, she will she will try to seek love for people that are not available. And any addict will do that's not available. And if they do turn around and give her some attention, it scares her to death. And what happens then, a lot of times, they will become the back walking away. They'll turn around and run away because they have that fear. It's all about the fear of intimacy. Intimacy is into me, I see. And when you haven't grown up with that, when you haven't had parents to feed that intimacy and that self-esteem and that self-worth, when somebody tries to give it to you in your adult life, it scares you to death, and that love addict will turn around and run off. So both sides of that must have treatment, and usually it takes inpatient treatment for that, but it takes someone who understands love and sex addiction. So, but that beat that to death. And so in the diagnostic tool, they also list binge eating as a process or as an addiction. And we see food addiction as an addiction, much like drugs and alcohol and tobacco. We see it can be. Eating disorders, food addiction is a twofold. People can have an addiction to certain foods. They can have an addiction to sugar, high carbs, where if you eat one, it calls for 20. It sets up that craving. And the craving for anything isn't set up until you put it in the body. Now, the mental obsession is there, when, like a food addict, it's just like alcoholism. Once you start drinking or using drugs, you get that sense of ease and comfort, and the brain knows that. And so when when a problem comes up, or a feeling comes up, or the sun comes up or goes down or whatever, any form of an addict will have the urge to use. They will have that mental obsession because they remember how it felt. So your food addicts will have that mental obsession of how it feels to take in the food and bring it in and get that sense of ease and comfort. And so, but the addiction doesn't really start, the craving doesn't start till you put it, and some people, and I don't argue with anyone about anything, a lot of people will say the craving starts before you use. I call that the mental obsession, because the body remembers the feeling that you get of the substance. So the mental obsession is set up. You take the substance into your body. Once you take one, it requires, calls for 2, 3, 20, whatever, and so that happens with alcohol, drugs, and food in some people. And, what we can get addicted to, like I said in the beginning, is sugar and high carbs. I've never known anyone yet to get addicted to broccoli or green beans. They just, there's not a substance in there that creates that, that craving once it's put in the body. And so, but I see every eating disorder has an addiction process that they go through. With the bulimics, and I am a recovering one, we're much like the gamblers, in that we go through such a ritual with the bulimia, and that is, everything's done in secret. Everything is done in secret. You get the whatever you're, the overeating, takes massive amounts of food. A true bulimic, they can eat 3 meals a day and keep it down. There's different patterns with every bulimic, and they can keep it down. But then everybody goes to sleep at night, the parents, everybody, and they will go and eat out the cupboard at night or the refrigerator. And it's not what they eat, it's the amount. You try to get a big enough amount in your stomach to ease the pain, to get that sense of ease and comfort. Bulimics get 2 hits. So you get that sense of ease and comfort, and the minute the food gets in, you have that fear, oh my God, I'm going to gain weight. And so you find some way to get that food up, either through laxatives, through diuretics, and through purging over that porcelain throne, to get the food out. So that to me is more of a substance addiction and behavior. It's combined too. Anorexics, what do they get addicted to? They get addicted to the high off of starving. When an anorexic starves, those natural chemicals in the brain kicks in, those endorphins, and they love it. An anorexic can feel 20, and I've got some recovering anorexics on here, and they, I think, would validate my reality if they talk. But an anorexic can feel 20 feet tall and bulletproof when they're starving themselves, because that brain kicks in, and those endorphins, and it's like a drug for them, and they feel powerful. And a lot of people will look at an anorexic that's 60, 70, 80 pounds and feel so sorry for them, bless their hearts, and it is a deadly disease. Anorexia is the number 1 killer of psychiatric diseases. It is the number 1, anorexia is. But the process that they go through is much like an addict. And what they get addicted to is those endorphins kicking in and being able to do something that normal people have to do. It elevates them up to where they think that they're really somebody by not having to eat like other people do. And like I said, a lot of people will see someone that is starving themselves to death and feel sorry for them. You don't need to feel sorry for an anorexic. It is a hard disease to have, it really is. But an anorexic has the energy. I've been in this field a long time, and I've treated Vietnam vets, and I have treated a hitman from the mafia. I've treated some tough characters, and I've only been beat up twice, and that was by 70-pound anorexics. They have a rage and an energy on the inside of them that is unequal to any that I've ever seen, and it's that built up energy. And they are usually mad at their parents. Usually their parents are very demanding of them, and they get into that. Anyway, I'm not here to talk just about eating disorders, but eating disorders do go through that same addiction cycle. Kleptomania is a process addiction. Kleptomania is that impulse, lack of impulse control of wanting to shoplift, steal something. And we have had them in treatment like that. They will take other people's stuff. They will take stuff out of the cafeteria. It's like a grabber person trying to grab something out here to bring it in to make themselves feel better. I had a client one time, a very professional, very successful, money-wise person, and I would got calls a couple of times from police departments calling me where she had been picked up shoplifting, and she'd shoplift something she didn't, it had no rhyme or reason. It wasn't anything that she would even use half the time. It was that feeling of taking something and bringing it in close and claiming it as theirs. Kleptomania. That is a process addiction, and it must be treated separate. And this is why process addictions must be treated by addiction people. You go to a straight master's level mental health person or a PhD, and they have great, wonderful credentials to treat mental illness, but they have maybe 3 hours in addiction. You know, if you suspect an addiction in yourself or in your family or process addiction, get with addiction therapists, because just a therapist alone, yeah, you might have some mental health diagnosis, anxiety, depression, all of that. But if you don't get to the core of why you are using something to make yourself feel better, you'll just switch off addictions. And that's what addiction counselors do. We help people get to the core of that hole in the soul. And whether we like it or not, folks, it usually goes back to that childhood. And if you don't take your clients back to that and see where they started getting the feeling, I call it that feeling of no damn goodness. An addict gets that feeling of, I'm not good enough. I'm not worth anything. And when you feel that, and then you have, if you've been raised, you know, in the disease of alcoholism, you have a high chance of being an addict. And you might skip alcoholism, but you'll pick up a process addiction because your brain chemistry tells you this will make you feel good. Gamers, I mean, gaming is the biggest process addiction we have today. So kleptomania, work addiction, and I could spend a whole time on work addiction. I became such a severe work addict. And after a while, you know, work addicts, at first, they just seem so long suffering, and they just work. And I did. It was like bringing something in here. It changed the way I felt. The addiction field was very young. I was one of the only women in it. I went all over the state. I did blah, blah, blah. I spoke. I served on boards. I did this. I did that, you know, and that fed my ego. And that's what any addiction does. It feeds the ego. Now you look at what ego is. It's easing God out. When you're into ego, it eases God out. And an addict of any sort makes their substance the God of their understanding. I made the treatment center where I worked, later on the treatment center that I put in, I made the work, the very essence of the work, going to work with clients, my life. I couldn't even go out to dinner with my family, and when I did, I would manage somehow to get the conversation around on work. And my daughters came up with this signal, and they would put up 3 fingers. You know, you look at it, that looks like a W. And they'd say, when we do this, Mother, that means you're talking about work addiction. And sometimes they'd get up and leave the table. They got sick and tired of me talking about work. And we don't talk about work. There's someone on the screen that's really taught us not to do that. We do not talk about work at family functions, do we, Cam? And to the very best of our ability, because we're all involved in the same, you know, in the treatment business. But when we have family functions, we don't talk about work. I could not talk about work because that was my identity, that was my ever being, oh my Lord, I've got to hurry. Anyway, I'll tell you this, I brought in a therapist to do a inventory of our staff. And she wrote, her name was Diane Fassel, and she wrote the book, Working Ourselves to Death. But she also would go into treatment centers and do evaluations, you know, stay a couple of days, interview everyone, and then have an exit review. And I had her come in to just look at our staff. So the day of the exit interview, all the staff was there, and I gave the staff permission to say, I said, I want you to be truthful, say anything you want to say, if it's about me or my family, tell her so we can get to the core of, you know, any problem. Guess what the core was? Me. And what it was is my work addiction. They said I worked all the time, that I would come in half mad, I would give them a job, I would take it back, I'd never let them complete a task, I oversaw everything. That's what work addiction is. I got every good feeling I had through my work. And so guess what? I got to go to treatment for that along with other things. So the solution is get professional help, and like I said, get to someone that can take you back to your childhood and get to the core of what is driving any addiction that you might have. You must do your work, that core work. And then along with that will be unresolved grief. There's going to be losses in your childhood. If you have some form of addiction, there's losses. And if you don't get to look at the loss, what you've lost through your addiction or through your childhood, and grieve it, grieve the loss of your childhood or your young adult life. But they must be, I can't stress enough, to find a licensed substance abuse counselor that is, and not all of them will be trained in process addictions. That's the kicker. You know, not all of them will be. Now, my daughter Kim is getting her master's degree from Texas Tech, and Texas Tech was the very first, and by the way, I'm coming live from Lubbock, Texas, at my friend's home here in Lubbock, home of Texas Tech. And Texas Tech was the very first university to start a program for substance abuse disorders and family dysfunction. And so my daughter Kim is getting her master's degree, and I am very glad to know that she has been talking to me about her textbook. There is a whole big section on process addictions. Go Tech. Go Tech. But I suspect that they're one of the very few colleges, universities that offer addiction therapy treatment, education, and that includes process addiction. So be very selective of where you go to school, what information you're hearing, and if you're seeking a therapist, make sure they're trained, because addicts can tell a good story, and we can buffalo a good therapist where they have a master's degree, PhD, and their heart's in the right place. But if they're not trained to treat sneaky, lying addicts like we can be when we're in our addiction, the therapist will be wasting their time, and the addict will be wasting their money. So processed addictions are nothing to be sneezed at. They are very real, and they affect families as well as the person. And they start small, and they get they do have they're very progressive. They have a relapse model, and there is and what makes a disease is it can be fatal, and that's what makes any addiction a disease. If it's progressive, if it's chronic, and fatal if not stopped. And what's fatal about a processed addiction, the number one is heart disease, and dying of some form of heart disease or suicide. So that's what I have. Let's talk. Anyone have anything? I took up nearly the whole time, but anyway, who wants to share? Do you have a process addiction? Have you ever lived with someone with a process addiction? And what's that like?